this way, and we get 2 where we usually you have 3. So we'll be all right. Be done by noon. I've heard about Dr. Chet Snow for a number of years and his presentations. It's difficult to, with his busy schedule, to get him scheduled, but we're fortunate this conference to have him here with us. From Sedona, Arizona, Dr. Chet Snow is one of the best researchers into a lot of the Hopi prophecies and a lot of these things that are of great interest to our people. And it is a real pleasure to present him this morning here for the first time at Global Sciences, and I know you will enjoy it. Welcome, Dr. Chet Snow.
Thank you, Dean. Well, I am feeling better than I was the other day, so hopefully this will all go off all right. It's certainly a great privilege to be with you, and I've certainly also heard of Global Sciences for a number of years. Unfortunately, most of the time the congresses were in August, when my wife, who is from France, who unfortunately couldn't be with us this week, she had to stay at home in Arizona. We spend all of that time, which is, of course, the better weather time in Europe, over there. So August, unfortunately, is always out. But now that he's also doing them in February, and especially in such a lovely place here as Daytona, it's a great privilege. So Edgar Cayce, the well-known psychic, once said, and it's a quote that I like to use because I really think it sums up a lot of material, that spirit is the pattern or the life, mind is the builder, and the physical is the result. And in a very few words, that puts in a nutshell, in my way of thinking, the relationship that we need to keep in mind about the tripartite aspect of our being. That at the apex we are all spirit. We are eternal, we are forever, we are spiritual. At the other end of the triangle, at the base of the triangle, a foundation, something that we must experience, is physical. We need to live in the physical. It's very important to honor the physical in our life. And yet there is that extraordinary bridge that is mind. And the human mind, the higher mind, is one of the most extraordinary tools that has ever been created, and certainly is one of the foundations of the co-created reality that we all live in. So my work has primarily focused on this area of this bridge, although obviously it touches the 2 ends of the spectrum, just as the bridge does. As I've heard from other speakers, and I'll just go through it real briefly because it doesn't really matter too terribly much, I didn't anticipate getting involved in this work 20 years ago, even 15 years ago. It sort of fell on me like a ton of bricks. Sometimes you have to get hit over the head with 2x4 before things enter into your consciousness, and that seems to be my way. I was an administrative officer and historical officer for the United States Air Force, working at Travis Air Force Base in California, where I had been since 1978, when basically 2 things happened. The first was that I had a physical problem. I wrestled with a 5-drawer, concrete-lined, classified safe, and of course lost. My body is not as strong as that safe was, and it would not open on command, and I was convinced that it should open on that command. That put me into a position where I went through about 2 years of rather agonizing pain, research, being a guinea pig, having people trying to figure out through allopathic medicine, and it was the best allopathic medicine, and certainly at that time around, what was wrong, and they couldn't find out what was wrong, so eventually they decided that I was just crazy with it, and it didn't really matter, and that they would continue to give me cortisone for the rest of my life, because that would temporarily block the pain. That was one thing that happened. Certainly taught me a lot about the physical, our relationship to medicine, our relationship to the body, all things that had never really entered my consciousness before. And then about, as I say, 18 months into this ordeal, I had a second thing happen on the spiritual level, which was my grandmother, who was very close to me. I lost my parents when I was quite young, and she was my closest living relative. Lived in Los Angeles. I lived up near San Francisco, but we would get together maybe half a dozen times in a year and spend all the holidays and that kind of thing. Suddenly, very quickly, at least to me, she passed away. And I only found out about it post the factum, I guess you would say, because my aunt decided that for her own reasons, she was not going to tell anybody until everything was done and all was settled. Well, my grandmother didn't particularly appreciate that, apparently, because she refused to stay dead, at least as far as I was concerned. And some of you may have read in Raymond Moody's works about what's called reunions, and he has a whole way of a room you can go into and set up with a mirror and a candle and do certain things that you can have deceased relatives literally come and talk to you. Well, I didn't have to have all of that or need all of that. My grandmother took care of that, apparently, because about a week after her passing, two things happened. First, my car started to stop. It would break down. I had a new car, and all of a sudden it would break down. I noticed the pattern after 2 times, and it was always breaking down in front of the metaphysical or occult, as they called them, bookstores then, back in those times. And so I figured out if I got out, and I went inside, and book on Edgar Cayce fell off the shelf on me, and I bought it, and after I got it, I said, gee, this is an interesting guy. I never heard of this man. It looks vaguely like my grandfather, in fact, but not my grandfather. And then the car would start again. Well, it wasn't very long after I figured that out that one night, and I was on a mission actually in Los Angeles area visiting an Air Force base doing some work, and I was going to go over to my grandmother's apartment with my aunt and clean it out and do the things one has to do in the physical after someone has left their body. She came into the room that night, into the visiting officer's quarters, certainly not a place particularly metaphysical in nature, and I wish I could say to you that she had this incredible metaphysical conversation, or that she allowed me to photograph aliens, or that she told me the secrets of the universe and all of life, but it wasn't like that at all. She was very pragmatic, and essentially she said, I have something for you to do. And I said, okay, well, when you see your grandmother literally walk out of the closet, sort of, out of the wall, I was a little startled, but at the same time, I think I had this in the back of my mind that this was a way of reunion, a way of saying goodbye. And she said, now you're going to the apartment tomorrow. And I said, yeah, you're right about that. She certainly knew everything. And in the linen closet, there's some things that are for you. And don't tell your aunt about them, just go get them. So I said, okay. And she didn't tell me what or anything more. It was just like that. And she said, now I just want you to know that I love you, and that your aunt did the things she did for her reasons, and that you must, be at peace with her. This is nothing to do between you and me, and it's not going to stop us from being together in any case. So with that, she disappeared. It's like a light, and went out. And it seems strange today to tell to you, but I just turned over and went to sleep. Just like that. It was calm, slept, wonderful night. Thought I had an extraordinary dream when I woke up. And in fact, I sort of even forgot about it. I went through my business. I went to Los Angeles about 3 in the afternoon the next day. My aunt said to me, and at that time I was a bachelor, so the bachelors always get the extra sheets and towels and all of that kind of thing that the family might hand around. And in addition to the books, because my family's a book family, she said, well, why don't you go into the linen closet, take any towels you might want from Graham, if there's anything you'd like. I said, linen closet, oh my goodness, that's right, I was supposed to get something out of there. So I went into the linen closet, and there behind the towels was a little bookshelf, and there were about a dozen books on it, and I didn't even look at them at the time. I just sort of took the towels, and there were some boxes. I just put them in there. I said to my aunt kind of offhandedly, oh, there's a couple of books here. Do you mind if I take these too? Oh, no, take anything you like, anything you like. And it wasn't until I got home that I really started to look at them. And what did I find? I found The Principles of Faith Healing. I found The Other Past Lives of Jesus by Ruth Montgomery. I found books on Edgar Cayce. And I became quite startled to find that my dyed-in-the-wool Methodist grandmother was, in fact, a closet spiritualist. Quite literally. So that was my introduction in 1982, 1983 to sort of this new world, this new point of view, this new perspective someone who had been trained as a historical officer, as a sociologist, and researcher, was now suddenly thrust into quite a different realm of things. Well, this conversation with my grandmother actually went on for about 3 full months, and she always knew where I would be. I traveled around the world at that time with my Air Force job, sometimes in Japan, sometimes in the Philippines, sometimes on odd islands in the South Pacific. She would find a time when I would be alone after the end of the day, and it would be convenient, and would come and tell me things about my own family, more personal things than anything else. But at the end of this period of time, she told me that she had other work to do. It's just how she put it. And that she was going to, nonetheless, sort of turn me over, you might say, to someone that I would meet soon, whose name was Helen and lived in Berkeley. Well, Berkeley's not very far from Napa, California, where I lived, so I wasn't terribly surprised at this. And Berkeley's well known as a university, so I knew people down there. No one by the name of Helen. But 2 days later, a lady came into a meeting where I was attending, a meeting on Edgar Casey actually, and started telling of Dr. Helen Wambach and all of the extraordinary research she had been doing into the idea of reincarnation and her clinical psychology studies, and how she was a serious researcher, and that she could explain to you from your past lives and all of this detail why you were doing the things that you're doing. So, of course, Helen Berkeley, you know, didn't take too much more than that. I got the lady's phone number, we met. It was as if we'd always known each other, and it started a partnership that lasted for 2 wonderful years until Helen passed away herself of a heart attack, a rather massive heart attack. She was a triple Leo, for those who study astrology, and heart problems are often associated with Leos, and she chose her 60th birthday, which I later found was highly symbolical in all the ancient, the Eastern time, and the time when you achieve, you know, sort of eldership, to pass away in August in 1985. And in some ways it was even tougher than with my grandmother, because for whatever reason Helen never came back in the same kind of very intimate way. I learned a lot of things though in those 2 years, and the upshot of it is that out of those 2 years of work, personal work but also research work, Helen kept saying I had a research bump, and you know, as the years have gone by, I've had more and more opportunity to look for it, but I haven't really found it yet. I do keep trying, so if you notice it, you know, it may stick out every now and then. Those are not horns, I guarantee you. Just the research bump coming out. So in this time, I learned a lot about her really extraordinary work into reincarnation. We'll talk a little in my workshop tonight on that, a couple of stories, but I don't want to go into them today. I have too much to share with you. The project that she had begun to work on, she had found to her satisfaction in her book, Reliving Past Lives, that we do have this ability through our mind, the bridge, to go across time in a psychic way, and to actually time travel. And we time travel across certain energy patterns and energy bands that seem to have a connection to us, whether it is a symbolic connection as in a dream-like state, or whether it is an actual connection as in a historical type of state where these are something we have personally experienced. We can tap into these memories from our past, from a past, and get rather accurate, interesting information about past time periods. And she did this taking people back all the way to 2000 BC and beyond, places that people have no concept of consciously, and found that when she took their stories and made aggregate charts and graphs of them, that they matched little-known social, economic, political facts about world population, about history, about things that most people don't talk about. So this was fine. But when she was doing this research, she also noticed that a number of people came up to her afterward, and after doing this experience, and they said, well, gee, you know, part of the time I was going where you said for me to go, and you mentioned a period of time like 1400, and suddenly I was seeing myself in a kind of a costume with a big puffy collar and a long doublet and a sword on my side and stuff like that. And then a part of the time, I would be flipping in the other direction, and all of a sudden I'd see myself in what might look like a silvery suit, or doing a spacewalk, and I couldn't understand how this was coming up, because obviously that wasn't in 1400. And so she realized in taking sort of a poll of this that a number of her subjects were able at the same time to flip into future reality just the same as they were able to flip into past reality. Now, in our research we found that, and I'll go into this in a little more detail again tonight because it is kind of more complex, that there seems to be a kind of, you might call it a blackout window, that is around the time that you're living in your current physical body. which is why clairvoyants and psychics are not the average run-of-the-mill population, and why people like Brian and others and Danny can get visions and can come up here and tell you things that will happen within our physical lifetime, because that blackout window doesn't exist. Like a curtain is pulled aside for those people. In psychic language, they say the veil is thin, or the veil is pulled aside. However, what we found was when you go outside of this envelope, which covers approximately your expectation of lifespan, not your actual physical lifetime, but your expectation of lifespan, whatever that will be. And for today, an expectation of lifespan is somewhere around 90 years. So, figure your birth date, go 90 years into the future, and that's going to be the most difficult period for you to be into. But as soon as you go beyond that, target something 150 years, 250 years, 350 years, the information clicks in just as easily as it does if you're going into the past. And so it doesn't seem as if memory itself works in quite the way that we think of. Think more of as a hologram, that every bit of memory is encoded, or each piece of time-space is encoded with information, and we can somehow tap into this. One of the interesting things that we did find was that when you take people into about 150 to 200 year period ahead of time, that suddenly a lot fewer people find themselves returning in a physical body here to the earth plane or to the material plane at that time. A lot of people say they're on vacation, and it's very relaxing and very pleasant, and it's more like a holiday. And that may be some people's experience tonight when we do the experience, because we will actually have a chance to do a little of this. We'll work with a little. I have 3 hours, which is enough time to get into this. So many times at conferences we only have an hour, 2 hour workshop, and that's not long enough. But tonight it will be. So that's fine. What we find is you can go farther ahead. Sometimes people come back into a material experience. Sometimes they have graduated out of this third dimensional universe and in fact are still experiencing consciousness. Consciousness never dies. We are that eternal spirit. We are a flame. We are a consciousness. But your reality experience of tangibleness is different. And you can actually get in touch with that difference and feel and see that difference. However, for those who did come into this experience, I want to show you a little bit of this idea, because even though it's hard to get photographs of the future, I've done my very best. And I want to show you because I was quite amazed in going through the research results of several hundred subjects to find that only 4 basic types of future for society. Remember, I'm a sociologist by training, so I like to look and see where people come into a situation. And one of the key questions we always ask, it's a very easy one, is what kind of environment do you find yourself in when you are experiencing this future or past, whatever it is, reality that isn't the one of your physical body, the one you're living in right now? What kind of environment? Sense it, smell it, feel it, touch it, taste it, feel or look around you. Get a sensory perception in your mind, remember, of this reality. And to my surprise, only 4 basic kinds of future came up. Now, can we have the lights down? If you can do that for the slides, we really have to have it. And this quite surprised me, that it would be that way. Because I would have expected with hundreds of people that we would have dozens, if not hundreds, of different types of realities. Now, they get technical on me here. Somebody told me I had a remote, but I don't see it. Ah, it's on the floor. All right. Thank you. Now, if I can read. Good. This is the cover of my book. By the way, how many people have not read my book? Good. I have 10 copies. If there are any left at the table after this thing, I don't want to know about it. I'll see you all over there. There's only 10 of them. You can get them all. Okay, good. And I deliberately put on there the subtitle, Do We Face an Apocalypse or a Global Spiritual Awakening, and the Choice is Ours? Because this is what I, in my research, in my work, have come to understand. We are facing great choices. We are at one of those time nexus points right now. What I've heard from Barbara Marciniak called the nanosecond. And at this time, I'd never heard of any of those terms, and I didn't know those particular dates. But the dates that came into my work and the work of the literally hundreds of subjects with which I worked in these future progressions showed that this is a very, very in time of choice, and that we are living in this choice time. And in fact, 1998 is a very key year in this choice time, as I'm going to go in. Now, looking forward, though, going farther ahead, looking at the year 2150, we will see these 4 types of society, 4 types of environments, the seeds of which are already sown in our own. First one, as you might imagine, is life on a space station or some kind of space platform or under a dome on a colony within our solar system, such as the moon or Mars. Those are the most common ones that came up. This represented about 20% of our sample altogether. And as you see from this picture from NASA, the plans for space station, of course, are very much underway. We're currently building it. Later, as I got more involved with working with some of the native peoples and understanding some of their prophetic visions, one of the key Hopi prophecies is that the very last great achievement of this civilization will be a home in space, as they say. A home, a platform in space high above the earth, that they feel will be one of the things that we will accomplish before the world age will change. Now, when you are in this environment, obviously the clothing that's associated with this environment, the kind of place you find yourself in, all matches. And again, when people would say, well, I'm in a space station, about 85% of them saw themselves in this kind of space suit or such a thing as that. Now, when we went beyond the space station, we found 3 types of environments here on the planet Earth. This is a Frank Lloyd Wright drawing of a house that he never built, but that was planned for California. And I took it because it really sums up the type 2 environment, which I call the creative communities, the New Age communities, because you see the emphasis on the round shapes, the beautiful white, the aspect of being near the ocean or the forests, and a harmony with nature. And everyone in this case, and this was about 15% of our sample, told us that they were feeling a great harmony, a great feeling of being in touch with themselves, of being in touch with nature, and that nature was beautiful around them. The clothing was completely different from the space station type people. About 85–90% saw themselves in what we could only describe as Grecian robes. Sometimes with bare feet, sometimes with sandals, indicating that they stayed in this environment and were pretty much isolated in this environment. These were small communities. These were places, as I say, out in the country that were alone oftentimes and had developed quite a sophisticated kind of mind or working with the mind and the mental aspects of things. Many people, when they talked about food, said, well, the food that we get is vegetarian, and it just comes. We ask for it, we call for it, we create it, we know there's a way to do that, and it comes. And then other people are doing the gardening, but they bring it, and we just ask, and it is there. Ask, and you shall receive. The second type of costume, which is about 15%, were similar to modern day judo or yoga type costume, sort of a tunic and pants or that kind of, this is from a meditation center in South Fallsburg, New York. So we have the seeds you see of these futures being sown right now. Now, the third type of environment was very different here on planet Earth, and this is actually right from Sedona. They call this Xanadu, and these are dome-covered environments, and I call these people the high-tech people because all of them talked about how they lived in a dome or some kind of a biosphere. And here's an experiment that's been going on, if you know of this, out in Arizona, where people actually were put in here to try and recreate an environment that they could stay in for 2 years at a time, here create their own oxygen, their own carbon dioxide and plants and enough vegetation to eat and all of that kind of thing. And outside, it's a very barren kind of wasteland. And this is what people saw. Now, this was the largest sample in our population in mass streams of the future. About 35% went to this area, this high-tech area, and saw themselves in an environment that's very different from the previous one in that, look at this interior of Biosphere 2. Do you see a round angle, a rounded thing except for the lamp? Nothing. Absolutely, totally rectangular, square, triangular. And I have since come to understand this is very associated with Atlantis. These are memories out of Atlantis where you find in our culture in the 20th century, we have come closer and closer to this rectilinearity as opposed to circularity, as opposed to the concept of all encompassing. Here, everything is at angles to each other. This is the third type of environment. Now, the clothing that these people found was quite different again. About 75% found themselves in these jumpsuit type of things. Interesting that this is a Japanese worker in the modern Tokyo sewer system. And there he is underground already. living, working in this very sterile environment there. Of course, this is before, I suppose, they're turned on. The picture was shown of this. The other type of clothing, which fascinated me to note, especially after hearing some of the talks of some of the people in the last few days, I've come to wonder what this might be in people's consciousness, was virtually no clothing at all. People lived inside. People didn't have to wear clothing much of any kind. And so here we have a much more, I think, sexy version out of vogue of this. People didn't particularly talk of this as being necessarily erotic, but they did say that clothing was optional in many cases, or at least not much necessary. And finally, the third type, which was about 7%, and I have done thousands of past life regressions, and this had never come up in a past life regression. People told us that they were androgynous, that they couldn't determine their sex, and that they were looking in a kind of a very androgynous lifestyle or androgyny. That is to say that they didn't have overt or exterior sexual characteristics. They didn't even know if they were a male or a female. And I've only found this in the future, and I've only found this in these technical communities and a few of the people that were out in space. None of the New Age people talked like this, and none of the fourth type of civilization talk like this. Now, the fourth kind is a very rustic or primitive lifestyle based on Native American concepts. This is the Taos Pueblo, where people today voluntarily have given up electricity and all of those types of things. They live through stairwells, they go in by their roofs, and communities being formed and based on that, or similar to the Appalachian style. And this is a picture of an auction in somewhere in Appalachia, and people's clothing reflected this fact. This is the most ordinary kind of clothing that came up. And again, 75 to 80% of people talked about living with sort of either moccasins or bonnets or even jeans still around, work clothes, overall types of things. And another fascinating aspect of this, we didn't ask people about animals in this research. It didn't cross either Dr. Wambach's or my mind, particularly to ask them about their pets or about animals. And so it may be a little bit skewed in that respect, but only in this society did people voluntarily talk about having animals. It's very interesting to us that, you know, pets are such a big, important part of people's lives today that 200 years from now, people did not talk about having animal companions to speak of, except here where they were being used, obviously, for transportation, for labor, for the kinds of things that you might have expected out of the late 19th or early 20th century. Now, one wonders whether these are coexisting, whether these are alternative futures, and I have to admit to you that I don't have an exact answer to that. I'm not going to give you a 100% prediction on which one of these societies or if any of these societies are the ones that are going to appear for us, are going to be there. But the seeds of which are already planted in our own unconscious do seem to be the most logical and most probable candidates. And it's very possible that they will coexist, just as we find in undeveloped parts of the world today, what the heck, even in the United States, that you can go a few miles from the most sophisticated technical kind of environment where people live to very basic, almost tribal environments that people are almost side by side in today. So this is the real work of Mass Dreams of the Future, was to get a look at these, what our future that is being built within our subconscious mind, the mind of many hundreds of people, and I have no reason to doubt that it is particularly different in people that we didn't test. These were quite normal people. They were not people of high psychic ability. They had to have some interest in this work, otherwise they wouldn't have come to the workshops. The workshops were kept deliberately low in cost. Sometimes I went to university or other places and we just gave them for anyone who, you know, volunteered to come. That was the one condition: you had to volunteer to come. It wasn't something we forced on anybody to do. Because I do not believe in mind control or messing with people's minds, and it is something that, you know, if they had an interest in being involved in. So how do these fit with some of the well-known predictions of people like Edgar Cayce? How do they fit with some of the older predictions of the prophets like Nostradamus out of the 16th century? My own experience was that in addition to having this research bump, it turns out I'm a very good subject for this kind of material. And Dr. Wambach found that in just a very short period of training that I was able to go into that envelope I was telling you about, go into the null zone or that dark zone. And so one whole part of mass dreams, and a part that oftentimes that's all they want to hear about. Frankly, I don't even think it's the most important part, but it is about this particular period we're now living in. And I was doing this in 1983 and seeing events in the late 1990s, seeing events such as we are now living through as the incredible weather patterns. Actually watching, it was quite strange to me to see people looking at television and watching weather on television. And I thought, gee, how could that be? People watching weather on television. Weather in 1983 was about a 2-minute segment on the evening news, and then it went on to something else, right? And you saw this guy standing up there in front of a static map and just sort of looked at it and pointed out 2 or 3 things with these unintelligible symbols, and then went on. Well, we now have a weather channel. We now have all this coming along. So it is very interesting. 1998 was a key year for Edgar Cayce. He picked it up quite a lot, and also Nostradamus. And what I found, and this is out of a work by John Hogue, that there seems to be a sequence that these people talk about time and time again. They use the word catastrophe. Frankly, I think it's a little bit of a charged word. I think that you could just as easily use the word, perhaps crisis. Crisis in the sense that a crisis presents, like in a medical model, a person with an opportunity to break a fever, to go through something and go forward. Obviously, it also presents the opportunity not to go through. Both of them coexist at the same time. And what they saw here was and this I think is important, not so much as the timing of these events as to the sequencing of these events, that there would be something in India and in the Indian Ocean area. And we have seen in the last few years, particularly more in the Indian Ocean and over here near toward Indonesia than India, but earthquakes of unusual magnitude, undersea earthquakes particularly taking place there. This would be followed by activity within Japan that would destroy parts of Japan. Edgar Cayce actually said the greater part of Japan would fall into the sea, would sink into the sea. This would be followed by unusual activity in the Mediterranean with Vesuvius and the area that had blown up in the time just before Jesus, and also in the Mediterranean that there would be, he called them Pele, the volcanic activity of Pele. We have seen Montserrat in the last few months and year or two. And that these would be the precursor, and this is one of the very few times that Cayce actually gave a timeline. He said that within 3 months of this set, these 2 sets of activity, that California would undergo massive earthquakes and actually would have sinking or part of the landmass going down as well. So these are the potentials of this period as seen by the prophets. Also as seen in part by my own experiences of projection or progression, as we often call it. When Nostradamus talked about this period, not only in the physical terms of earth changes, he also talked about certain societal changes. And I think that some of them are very important for us to keep in mind. The first one was, he said that from swords wet with blood from distant lands, a very great plague will come. And this is showing, of course, that pointing out that plague and blood would be associated. Now we know we've had a tremendous epidemic, the AIDS epidemic that's gone around the world since the early 1980s, and in which, of course, is very much involved in the blood. The Ebola virus is also a blood virus. It is something that many people you've heard even during this week talk about, that there is that potential for a new and even more important plague possibly coming to us from whatever source, from whatever reason. That is not my purpose to go into those. Many people have done more research on that, and you'll get better information from them, certainly from Dr. Horowitz, whom I think is going to speak this afternoon. But the idea that this in the 1600s was already being predicted for this time period, because Nostradamus called this the beginning of the the 7th millennium. And it sounds like a long way off from us, but the 7th millennium in his time denoted the period of the year 2000, because they believed the world had been created in 4004 BC. And therefore, actually, 1996 was the beginning of the new millennium, according to that dating system. So at that time, we would go through a passage, he predicted, where these plagues would be one thing. The second thing would be that within the religious structure, and of course he was a Roman Catholic, he was of Jewish origin, but his grandfather had converted, and he grew up a very staunch Catholic in a century in which the Protestant Reformation was going on, and he was very opposed to the Protestant reforms. And so the Catholic Church was very important to him, and he said this with great sadness, that the ruin of the church approaches not from the walls, in other words, not from the defenses outside, but from within the lifeblood and substance. And this book shows a picture of the death of John Paul I. And again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but if you will look into some of the research that has been done there, you will find that those were very, very suspicious circumstances. That Pope was about to undertake radical reforms of the upper hierarchy and the finances of the Church, and of course with his death all that was stopped, and the current pontiff has done everything to take attention away from the reforms of the upper hierarchy and the finances of the Roman Church, and turn attention toward the social and, quote, moral issues of the day. So it's been quite a change here in the lifeblood and substance. And as you know, there have been many more scandals involving the clergy in recent times than there have been also in the past. Some of them clearly associated also with the AIDS epidemic, that there have been more priests who have had AIDS than has ever been widely published, but it is known in circles within the church itself. So this would be a second test of civilization of this time, the plague on the physical level, and then a rotting at the core of the spiritual level, to the point that by the year 2000, or within the envelope around the year 2000, the papacy itself would be under attack, and there might well be an anti-pope as well as a regular pope, and that there would be a splitting within a schism within the structure of the church as Nostradamus saw it. He was very saddened and upset about this in that time. The third thing that would happen would be that there would be a major war that would take place in this period, and this war would come from the Islamic part of the world and aided by the Chinese. Very interesting. In the 1560s, that a person would be talking about the late 20th, early 21st century as a time when there would be, he called it a coalition of the countries of the North Pole. And those countries, of course, in his day were basically England and Russia and the Nordic countries, and now would include the United States and Canada coming out of England, because England had a claim to those parts of the world back then in the colonies. And that this invasion would take place in much of Europe through the Mediterranean, across the Adriatic Sea, the Aegean Sea, and that in fact he discussed many cities in France and Switzerland and Spain being destroyed as part of this process from this period of time. And one of the things that he talked about was a plot being hatched in Fez, Morocco, that would be coinciding with the death of the Pope. And that there would be something along this line, that there would be, so watch and see if there's anything in the media about Fez, Morocco, and I tell people this all the time. You may find that something happens from there. You know that is a very important Arab country with the King Hassan, who has been very conservative up till now, but that usually has a way of breaking apart very quickly when those things come. The other country that he gave great credence and talked about was Turkey. And I often tell people, watch what is happening in Turkey if you want to know the future of the Islamic world. Because Turkey and the Turkish-speaking republics, and by the way, this whole area of the world is mainly Turkish-speaking, even though it used to be part of the Soviet Union. Those are the areas that control the next largest world oil supply. The biggest oil reserves, bigger than Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, are in the area of the Caspian Sea. The people who run the world know this. They have been doing everything they can to grease the palms in Turkey. But the Islamic fundamentalist movement has been growing there, and it is taking over their educational system. This is the most dangerous aspect when we find fanaticism taking over education, because what does education? Education controls the future. So just watch that very closely. Now, into the middle of all this, he says, this will not be the end of the world, because suddenly there will be a pole shift. There will be a shifting of the magnetic or other poles, the poles of the earth, and it is such that there will be great sweeping floods that will stop the armies, change the course of the invasions, and in fact give the world time to regroup, time to restore many things. And after that point, there will come a great leader out of the West. Nostradamus was from France. He particularly and especially predicts a French leader, interestingly enough, that will come and will become, in a sense, like the man on the white horse. Well, there are many traditions around the world that talk about a messianic revolution or something in the spiritual nature, that the symbol of which will be the white horse. Now, this will nonetheless leave much of the planet devastated. We have already seen the results of the unbridled industrialism, particularly in Eastern Europe. This is not a picture of the future. This is a picture of a place in Poland when Western photographers were allowed in the first time in 1989, 1990 after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and they saw what had gone on there. So as a result of many of these events happening, we will find that the ecology will be very severely disturbed around the planet, and this will take quite a lengthy time to restore itself, and many people will actually leave the planet apparently and go onto space platforms or some kind of environment outside to wait out the worst of the results of this. In Mass Dreams of the Future, one of the things in the late 1990s that I saw people talking about more and more was this area called the Ring of Fire, which is the Pacific plate around the Pacific Rim, California, and you notice that there are little plates, little places, like here, where the red lines come together over here. This is, by the way, where the French atomic tests were, where that 14-mile rift has taken place in the subcrustal area of the Earth that was talked about earlier. Not very well widely known, but yes, absolutely causing great venting of volcanoes. And what we have found is that the little bit of research that's been done, excuse my voice, is that more and more volcanic activity is going off under the water. The Galapagos Islands, where Darwin did a lot of his research, are over here, and a lot of scientists go there because they have data going back 150 years or so. And they recently did an underwater expedition there because they had found some unusual fauna, unusual plants and animal life. And they said, well, how can this very warm water plants and animal life be coming here when this should be very, very deep trenches in the ocean floor? And they put down one of these bath escape things, and they thought they'd find maybe a volcano or two going off or some kind of leaking. They found an area the size of the state of New York with 10,000 volcanic leak vents going off under the water, none of them coming to the surface. But what is the result of this? Well, I'll tell you the result of this. The result is what you are being told is El Nino. The result is that the water in the eastern Pacific along this rim is warming up. You are being told on your weather channel that this has to do with breezes and currents and blah, blah, blah. Most of that is nonsense. It is coming from under the sea, and as that happens, the trade winds actually change their patterning because the wind follows the water. And as that changes, the weather patterns change, and the results are all of the flooding taking place in the United States. And at the same time, no, this won't go back. There. Come on. One more. Yeah, at the same time, you're finding incredible flooding right here in China, and this has not been very well reported, but the worst floods in all of known history, and in China that goes back 2,000 years, 3 out of the last 7 years, they have had more flooding in the interior plains, Yangtze Valley areas of China. Drought, nonetheless, taking place here and on the eastern coast of South America. Quite the opposite taking place, because the more rain in one place, you have to have less rain in another place. And that's how the weather patterns around the world go. So El Nino is directly related to this phenomenon, which more and more is going to be talked about as the awakening of the Ring of Fire, coming along with Japan, and ultimately volcanic activity here in the western part of the United States, up in Alaska. And frankly, that is the one of the markers I am currently looking to see if this winter we will have that volcanic eruption. I personally saw it as being the one here. This is Mount Fujiyama. That is what I saw in Mass Dreams of the Future. I do not know if that is precisely the one, but it will be in these latitudes. This is Tokyo, by the way, just to give you an idea how close it is to one of the world's most heavily populated cities of the planet. And that will be a trigger that will release energy from within the core of the Earth that I go into in more detail, and that has been seen psychically by many different predictors. I'm not hearing only from me. All I can tell you is that my book was published first in 1989, and so a lot of this now is being confirmed by other people. A second possibility, and something that I also saw concurrently with the changes from the inner Earth, and this is a French article, is asteroid coming down from outside. And all I want you to look at this map is to look at this map. If you were divided in half along the equator, look how many more asteroid craters or meteor craters have occurred in the northern hemisphere of the Earth than the southern. Only place down in the south is in Australia. This says to me, because we know the Earth tilts, there's a precession of the equinoxes, it faces certain parts of the rest of the galaxy or the rest of our solar system at different times over that 26,000-year cycle that's been talked about, that we've had more bombardments in very specific periods of time and then many, many thousands of years where there have been few, if any, bombardments. We are now moving into a period of time, geologically speaking rather short, but for us it will be over 100 years, of a much more intense activity. One of the reasons apparently behind this, and the work of Zecharia Sitchin comes to mind, who studied ancient records from the Sumerians, the oldest known written records. I don't know if he's spoken at Global Sciences, but I'm sure you know of his work. There's a book called The 12th Planet, which I have back at my table. If you haven't read about this, it is that sort of the basic book to get. I like to carry the ones that I consider to be the crucial ones, the most important ones. This planet is in a very long elliptical orbit, way outside of the plane. All the rest of the planets are in here. And as it comes back toward the center of the solar system, it goes through the Oort cloud and the Kuiper belt, which are where space debris of the formation of the solar system pile up out there. And just like a slingshot, the gravitational well of this very large planet, 5 times the size of Earth, comes back and throws that material toward the inner solar system planets. Here's the inner solar system. He calls it Nibiru. And you will find this in some other literature as referred to as Planet X. Sometimes it's referred to as the Phoenix, because no one knows it's like the planet that rises from the ashes and suddenly reappears in the sky. And the ancients were well aware that there was some form of astronomical activity. One of the reasons that they were so incredibly and intensely interested in being able to predict astronomical events and do sky observatories was that they knew something might come from the sky. This is from Sky and Telescope showing a recent meteor which came between the Earth and the Moon. And you heard Brian just before me talking about the one that just hit in Greenland, information apparently even being suppressed. But we've had at least a dozen in the last 10 years that have bounced off our atmosphere. There's actually photographs of someone in 1989 up in the Rocky Mountains who saw one that it lit up the whole sky. And came apparently down in a way that it blew up, it broke up, just as Shoemaker-Levy broke up over Jupiter, and the pieces were too small to do any significant damage. Our atmosphere has protected us tremendously, and of course it still will continue to do so. But I think that we need to understand, and many prophecies relate to this, that there will be these kind of events, whether or not they are just signs in the sky, lights in the sky, or actual physical impacting events. They will be shaping our history in the decades to come. The results of this might be something very much like this. And the reason I finally did a map, I saw all of this, and my subjects saw all of this back in the middle 1980s. I never had the thought to put it into mass streams. I now wish I had. Gosh, Gordon Michael Skyens made a fortune off of his. But and I published, you know, I did this long before, but the reason is that somebody on the internet 2 years ago, I finally got an internet connection, and I'm being a basic egocentric guy like anybody else. I said, gee, maybe is anybody talking about me on this web? So I looked up my name, I keyed my name in, right, Chet Snow, and what came up was somebody's map, and they said, this is Chet Snow's map. And I looked at it and I said, this doesn't look like what I saw. It ticked me off. Somebody had taken what I think were clear ideas and put it out there in their own way. They were actually turned out to be a very nice guy, but it inspired me to go ahead and make this map up. Now, we talked about safety lands yesterday and all, and Lori Toy, and I'll show you her world map, which has sort of superseded the America map. But I think it's very clear that this, to me, is a three-pronged process. We're going to have changes here in the West Coast, where the Colorado River Valley and this area of Nevada, Utah is going to collapse, including the Grand Canyon. Then there will be changes here where new land, and Edgar Casey predicted this, will rise, not only Atlantis, but also off the coast here in the Carolinas, leading to marshes, bays, this part of Florida, possibly going under, possibly not going under. I felt pretty stable here, interestingly enough, in the Daytona beach area, and I wondered about that, and so I put a question mark. But there will be marshy, certainly the bottom of Florida, the whole lower part of Florida will go. Then, as this rises, the water will be displaced into the center. So that you find, again, which is not unlogical, the most safety areas will be along the spine of the Appalachian Mountains, very clearly, the Ozark Island, as I call it, up in the upper northwest Bitterroots, eastern Washington, western Montana, and in what the Hopi call the Four Corners, particularly along in here, where the biggest problem will be where you will have water sources after this supply, because it will change some of the underground water sources. So, talking of those, and the other big safety place is in the spine up here, and that's, of course, where Gordon Michael Scallion lives. So you have Gordon Michael Scallion living up here. You have Lori Toy living over here. You know, people have found, you have Danny living over here, just naturally migrating to those areas. I do not sell real estate, by the way, but those of you who do make a living at that might want to find this is a key place to look for. Some of these events, as they are occurring, as they are coming about, I do not think they will all happen overnight. I think you will have warning. I think we are getting warning, and some of these may be mitigated. But this is the vision. This is the type of scenario that was seen. Unfortunately, not in the book. If you're really interested, I don't have any copies with me, but I can get some copies of this later, and we can talk about it at the table. Lori Toy's map of the whole world. She now has it in a more published version. I have been friends with Lori since 1989 and was with her when she was helping to bring this material through. What I think is fascinating here is her look at America. It's not too different from what I showed you. Inner sea here, a big chunk of the West being taken out. A new land coming up, particularly in the Pacific, she sees, more than in the Atlantic. I saw more land off of the Atlantic. She sees it down here in the Atlantic Caribbean area. But look at this in Europe. Tremendous areas gone, even parts of South America, the Middle East, big parts of China, Japan reduced, Australia split in two, which I later found out was an aboriginal prophecy, that if the ways of the ancestors were no longer followed, that the continent would split someday. And there is a big fault line, and there used to be an inner sea, much of where all of these top secret intelligence gathering satellite bases are. Very interesting, very interesting. Now, look at this, and then look at this map that I found from a satellite. And I was quite amazed. Anybody got an idea what these yellow parts are? Well, it's an infrared map. What does that tell you? Okay, so it's measuring heat. What creates heat? Combustion, when you burn things. What do we burn? We burn fossil fuels. We burn trees. We burn coal. We burn oil. Look at the Middle East. Those are all those wells, the gas burning. This is all the Amazon forest they're burning. These are the cities, of course, of the world as well. Look at this down in Libya and places where they're just literally, you know, they just vent that stuff out because to them it's just a nuisance. They want to bring up the crude and they vent it off. Now, if I can get this thing to go back, notice these areas. See, this is there we go. Can you see how close? I guess about 75% of those yellow dotted areas will be underwater by Lori Toy's map in the next 200 years. What is the most powerful natural cleansing for our planet? Water or fire. We're burning the stuff up. That's not working. It's just polluting the atmosphere. The mother is going to take care of it. Water. Now, that just gives you an idea of what some of the modern day prophets have said. Going back in ancient times, we find that the calendar has been a very key part of our understanding of very long cycles of history. This is a zodiac calendar from ancient Egypt. And what's interesting about it is this is called the equinox point, the vernal equinox, or the your ascendant, they call it. And it's pointing to the constellation of Leo. You can still see the same animals, the Leo, the lion. Now, that at one point represented the spring time of the year. Now we know Leo's in the middle of the summer. As the solar system goes through the skies, you know, the precession of the equinoxes, we slowly go from one sign back to another sign, pointing that at the spring equinox. This represents a time approximately 12 to 13,000 years ago. And we find that there are many, many ancient civilization systems that base their calendar going back to that time of Leo. And why is that important to us? Well, it's important to us because the opposite of the age of Leo is the year 2012, 2050, right in the time we're moving into. We are moving into the age of Aquarius. There are 12 signs of the zodiac. Leo is the opposite to Aquarius. So therefore, we are moving halfway around that great clock right at this point. And all of the prophecies have been based on knowledge from the ancients that something happened, key, perhaps the flood, perhaps the end of Atlantis. Back in that time, now we know that the pyramids and the Sphinx at least predated that event or came very close to that event because they had water weathering rather than air wind weathering, and I know there's going to be a whole lecture on that this afternoon that I certainly think no one should miss. Now, this calendar is pointing us in this direction to the present, right at the time we are in. Another great builder of calendars were the Mayan people of Central America. They have a cycle of 13 baktuns. We will find throughout the ancient world the number 4, 13, and 20 are used time and time again in certain civilizations. 4 representing the 4 directions, and the 13, as Barbara Marciniak pointed out, the 12 calendar zodiac plus the extra sign, the sign that used to be there, and often being worked out with 20. We find in the Mayan system they had a 360-day calendar, and then they had a spiritual calendar which was 260 days. And if you think of these two calendars as like two gears, cogs in a wheel, as they came together, the same day would be represented by the two calendars at once every 52 years, which is 4 times 13. That's why we have decks of cards. Ever think about it? 13 cards to a suit, 4 suits to a deck of cards. So 52 years became a sacred number to the ancient Mayans, and from their civilization it became a sacred number to all of the native cultures in the New World, because the Mayans, having received much of their information from ancient Atlantis, disseminated that information down through other tribes, other groups at the end of their cultural time, including the Aztecs, and ultimately down to the Hopi, who are the last remaining remnant in North America, except for the Central American Mayans still themselves, of that ancient culture. And they took that culture, brought it with them from the Central America up to the deserts of the Southwest, which were much less desert-like, by the way, 700-800 years ago than they are today. Now, one more thing I wanted to mention. Can I get back? This thing. Why is this important to us? And I just wanted to point this out. Their cycle, which is 5,200 years, or 100 times 52, started way back. The last cycle they started in the 3000 BC era and ends in 2012 on the winter solstice. It's why you'll hear many, many discussions of 2012, 2013 as being the changing of the great wheel of time, the great calendar of time. It's because the ancient Mayan civilization looked at their time period and saw civilization coming around. They call this period from 1618 to 2012 the great materialization of the world, to be followed by its spiritualization, or the testing purification at the end of that time. Mayans had pyramids. You'll notice that the pyramids have 9 stories. They believed that there were 9 lords of time. One of their prophecies was that time is divided into heaven, or positive periods, and hell, or negative periods, depending on where we would be on that cycle of that calendar. One of their predictions was that the gods who had given them this information, and whom they described as being white skin, having beards and strange helmets on their heads, and coming in great boats from the east, those gods would return someday. And they were told by their ancient prophecy that if the gods returned carrying this sign, then they should be welcomed, because this was the ancient universal sign. The circle surrounded the 4 directions. So we have the concept of the circle, or unity, the spiritualization of all, and within it the physical, and connected through the arms of the mind, the body, mind, and spirit. And if the gods came back with this, then they would know that they had taken the ancient knowledge and preserved it, and they would be bringing back 9 periods of heaven to the Mayans and the other native peoples in the Americas. 9 times 52 is 468, I hope. I'm not very good at math, but I think I remember that one. The Cortez landed on the coast of Mexico in 1519. Now, that would have meant 468 years of positive spiritual and political growth. However, and prophecies often have a downside. If the gods came back with an elongated cross and didn't have the circle, then it would be transformed into 468 years of hell, or 9 times 52 hells. Well, we all know what the Spanish conquistadors carried with them, the huge long pole cross, the cross of the Catholic Church of that day. No circle, no equal directions, and I think they said, uh-oh, look what's coming. Do the math. 1519 and 468 comes up to the year 1987. 1987 predicted by this calendar to be the time when that curse would be lifted and the native cultures would begin to be reborn. Look at what has been happening over the last 11 years of history. What do we see all around this country? Resurgence of native spirituality, resurgence now with casinos of enough money that they're rebuilding things. Resurgence in the Central American and Mexico countries of the native cultures, much to the discomfiture of the ruling governmental elites, by the way, of those areas. So, we are ending that period of time. A harbinger of this end, according to Mayan prophecy and later Aztec prophecy, would be the return of these artifacts. There would be up to a dozen of these ancient crystal skulls that had been fashioned thousands and thousands of years even before the Mayan civilization, had been handed down to them as great objects of power that would be brought back into the world, and they would either help to transform and spiritually enhance the civilization, or they would bring about the destruction of the world. This was the two-pronged prophecy about the crystal skulls. This extraordinary object was found in 1927, and it's the only one to have a movable jawbone so that the skull could be made to look to talk. This is what is called the Mitchell-Hedges skull, because this lady, who's now 91 years old, at the time she was a girl of 16, was the discoverer, along with her archaeologist father, Frank Mitchell-Hedges, back in the wilds of what was then British Honduras and is now Belize. Anna was given the skull by the native people there. They were told in a dream that it should go with her, and she still carries it with her today and has it now in England, where it is in safekeeping. At the same time, since that period, more and more of these artifacts have come forward, and one of the most extraordinary things about them is that you can look into them and see and even photograph, in some case, pictures. Can you see it? It's a Pleiadian beam ship, straight out of Billy Meyer. It's a UFO. Look down here, an ant-like creature. The ant people are well known in Hopi prophecy as being, I'll say, the good aliens, or the good inner earthers, the ones that help to take care of people during the time of catastrophe or purification of the planet. If you turn the skull and put a different light on it, you can see dolphins. If you turn it and look at a different way, you can see angels with wings. It's quite an amazing artifact. And this is true of several of these ancient skulls. There is a book written about them. It's now out of print. Fortunately, Sandra Bowen is a neighbor of ours, and we have, I think, 3 copies that we bring around and can take with us. So that's also something, if you're interested in knowing more on this. It's not really the topic of my lecture today, but I just want to bring this in because these are also part of predictions, and these are markers, I call them. I look for markers in history and markers in current events, because I do not believe that predictions and prophecy are 100% going to happen. I don't think anything, except very possibly what is determined within the next couple of months, is set in stone. We are co-creating this reality, but we mark as we do, and we can see by the markers that are there how the most probable future is going to unfold. These are 2 more of the ancient marks. This is Max in Texas. This is Shana Ra from California. And that Barbara Marciniak is going to be channeling with them. We're bringing her and them to Sedona, Arizona next week, a vortex center of its own, to work with some of the Pacific grids. Unfortunately, our conference is completely sold out, but I do want to tell you that we'd be very happy to have any of you next weekend focus in on us using the energy of the eclipse that's taking place the day before on the 26th, focus in on us the night of the 27th in the ceremony that will be done with Mayan priests and also Native Americans on focusing energy through these extraordinary artifacts to help realign the grids out in the Pacific, of which Sedona is one part, one anchoring end, you might say, into the west coast of the United States, so that we have an opportunity to work on some of this material. And I just invite you all to do that on your own. One of the visions that I saw in my Mass Dreams book was that in 1998 I would be living in northern Arizona. And I saw a scene very similar to this one. And so I couldn't believe it the first time I came to Arizona 10 years later that there was a sign out by the highway saying Vision Properties for sale. So I had to take a picture of it. I've never seen that sign since. I've driven along this highway hundreds of times now because I did move to Arizona in 1991 and later moved a little bit farther north than this, now to the town of Sedona, into the house that I saw in the visions in Mass Dreams of the Future. But just as how often the mind works, I saw myself living on a ranch. If you get the book or if you've read the book, you'll know about the ranch that I talk about. But now what I found is I live in a ranch house. Interesting, isn't it? So I'm not in that isolated ranch, thank you very much. And my personal life has improved much over what was foreseen in 1983. The future is being co-created. We do have that potential to be changing it. If not, I wouldn't even bother to be here talking about all of this with you, because if it were just all going to happen and nothing could be changed, what the heck bother? I just find one of those safety lands and go there. We are co-creating. We have that possibility. That's the message I want to give to you. But you have to get informed. You have to see both sides. That's why this kind of a conference is so important, because don't buy into the negativity, see both sides, and then choose the light. Thank you on that. Now, as soon as I moved there, I realized that the real reason why I had moved there had little to do with the center I was going to set up in the therapy and the friend who got me to move there. It had to do with the Native Americans. It had to do with the Hopi. I couldn't believe it, but within 1 month of my moving there, I received a phone call out of the blue from one of the elders of the Hopi village of Hotevilla asking me to come and share some of their prophecies. This is their little village. This is the Oraibi village. Hotevilla is next to it. This was Grandfather Martin. And he allowed me to go out with them and to their canyon and look at some of their symbology. We're not quite ready. I'll tell you which one. There is the slide we can't see on the video. And the Hopi have this concept of coming out, emerging from within the center of the earth. They have this idea of concentric circles as representing the earth and the 4 traditional colors along with the 4 directions. They have kept the ancient sign. This was the sign that was the universal sign thousands and thousands of years ago. The quadrants and the concentric circles. Look at their little moon too. I think that's such a cute. Seminole Indians right here in Florida. Same symbols, same colors. Ancient Australian, same concentric symbols, where spirit goes into the earth, where matter and spirit meet, the dream time marking. Ancient Tibetan, Kalachakra wheels. Look at the 4 colors, same, the gates. This is a time wheel. All around the world. This is from one of the oldest sites, over 20,000 years old, in the Alps, called Mercantour, the plateau of Mercantour between France and Italy. Stonehenge itself, using the circular energy, here in a sophisticated form, as in a solar lunar observatory. Cups and rings, as they're called in Scotland. Again, this is the ancestor to the labyrinth, because the labyrinth is the same form, just made elaborate, a way of moving in and out. These are actual time machines, ladies and gentlemen. These are ways of moving across dimensions and through time. Now, this is the next one that we can't show, okay? They took me out in the Hopi Canyon. If you'll just focus on me, or I don't care what you do. The sky. This is a Genesis story, a story of creation. This is the baby coming from the womb. This is the male-female joining. This is the male-female joining in the sky, Mother Earth, Father Sun, the moon. And the reason that this got exciting to me was that I had just been in contact with some friends in England, and they had shown me this picture in the crop fields. The same symbols as the Hopi were showing me in their ancient rock carvings. When I showed the Hopi this other symbol from the crop fields, they began to cry. They said, this is our symbol for balance and the mother. The earth is out of balance. Now, if you were to stop the picture right here, that would be in balance. Look what's happening. Here is an arrow being pointed at the heart of Mother Earth. This symbol appeared in the fields in England on August 1st, 1990. Does that say anything to you? That is the day Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. You should understand that these are not exempt from current events. Arrow being pointed at the balance of the earth. This is a later one. That's the symbol I showed you, the birthing symbol from the Hopi petroglyphs. Circles started out in 1978, very simple. They graduated into rings, and by the mid-1980s, the first intelligent symbols were being given to us. And what is that again? That is the ancient symbol of the four directions, the spiritual symbol that is probably mankind's oldest spiritual marker. They call it a quintuplet, or the Celtic cross in England. 1987, 1988, the year of the harmonic convergence, crop circles went from a half a dozen to 51 in one season. All at once, exploding. 51 plus Mother Earth, or 51 plus the stone circle of Avebury makes 52, sacred number. You will find sacred geometry throughout the crop circle phenomenon. These are not men from a pub. Here is Avebury, the 52nd circle. You notice how even the roads divided into the ancient symbol. One of the oldest Neolithic sites, 6,000 years old, in England. Ancient times, it was part of a giant serpent. This is the Egyptian version, the sun serpent. Now mostly destroyed. Serpent Mound in Ohio. We used to have these serpent mounds all over the middle and eastern part of the United States. Of course, they were destroyed by people for agricultural purposes and also out of religious bigotry. A few have been preserved. Spirit power in Sedona of the serpent. The ancient serpent or lizard, positive heritage around the world, because remember, everything has two sides to it. The Egyptians saw the serpent in a negative way if it were in the sky, and this is a serpent in the sky. The serpent in the sky was this, the comet. Now, we've been talking about a lot of things to do with the physical, and I realize I don't have much time, but I do want to point out to you, we are now, since December, going through the tail of Hale-Bopp. The tail of Hale-Bopp is much more important than the flashy show that you saw last March. Why? Because as we go through the tail, the gaseous parts of the comet enter into our atmosphere, and billions of microorganisms that are contained within them who have not been in contact with the earth for 4,000 or more years have returned, melt, and come down, and you breathe them, and guess what you get? Flu, plague, problems. Understand that. This is the real thing that happens with comets. They inject back into our atmosphere things that haven't been here for thousands of years, that we have no longer much immunity to. Serpents in the crop circles. One beautiful one in 1991, and another one in 1994. All this serpentine energy. Ancient serpent in the Australian tradition called the black serpent, and it was a fertility symbol. In the Hopi, the fertility symbol of Mother Earth mated with the sun. In the crop fields, 1991. This was a very complex diagram that was given And two Germans came up with quite an interesting theory on this, that this represents a stellar map, and we're talking of this representing the third orbit of the sun with a planet that has a big moon. Well, what would that be? Earth. If you go out here, you find two planets around the sun. So they feel that we need to look for a similar sun with two planets going around it as the origin of the makers of crop circles. This symbol came in 1991. Again, it emphasizes the two rings around the sun in a certain pattern that the Germans feel is in the sky, and they have found, they believe, this pattern in the sky near the area of Orion. And when they went back and looked in ancient pyramid texts, they found that the belt of Orion, seen here, actually in the pyramid text, the ancient text pointed to a star that they feel is there's a G-type star out there similar to ours. Now, this knowledge apparently is not as hidden as we might have thought. The ancient texts in the pyramids also showed incredible artifacts. Here's the close-up. These are 5,000 years old from the temple at Abydos, which is the Osirium. Talked about those cigar transport ships. The Apollo astronauts. This was the original symbol. It was later removed. Look at that. Orion pointing to the star within the triangle of the Barbary Castle crop circle. Crop circles are multi-dimensional in meaning, multi-level. Okay, next one. Can we quickly, I think if you have to take it to 0, yep, lift it up. Hopefully the next one will go on. I realize we're getting near the end of the time. If I don't have time to finish this, I will finish it in the workshop. Okay. One of the Hopi prophecies says, the eagle must land on the moon before the purification of the world can begin. Guess what we did? 1969. There must have been some Hopi that were pretty upset when they found that our lunar lander was called the Eagle. The second part of their prophecy is less well known. It says it says then the moon must appear on the earth. 1992, the first lunar crop circle. This is exactly the Hopi symbol for the moon, a full moon with a crescent center. Since 1992 and never before, there have been crescent crop circles every single year. None before, every year since. The four directions again. This is a crop circle picture from Canada. And I show it particularly to show you, look, absolutely no footpaths. The same quintuplet type symbol came in Oregon, near the town of Aloha. Very similar to Aboriginal patterns in their dreaming time. And to the Kiva patterns. This is at Chaco Canyon. The kivas are the sacred round rooms that the Native Americans in the Southwest used to do their ceremonial work in. And this is Mars, the face, and in alignment, do you notice the pattern? That's called the city. It's very interesting that the work of Richard Hoagland, whom some of you may know of, has said that the geography of the plain of Cydonia on Mars most closely matches one place on the face of the earth. Have you heard that quote? The place is Avebury. 80% of crop circles appear around Avebury. Do we have to question why? The Hopi have an initiation ceremony every year where they go into a spiral and pour cornmeal down into a well, which they consider to be one of the places that people came and were kept in the underground rooms. Spiral crop circles started to appear in 1993. Another extraordinary symbol in 1993, this is a symbol that is from ancient Sumerian time, and it means the primitive human beings. It's also part of Hopi symbols. On their tablets, they have ancient stone tablets along with the serpent, along with corn, the raining clouds, the kachinas, or the sky gods, and the rings. 1994, Shoemaker-Levy comet started hitting Jupiter on July 16th. 5 sets of crop circles appeared up until July 16th and never the pattern again. Called them the Scorpion, but they were related to Jupiter comet Levy, Shoemaker-Levy. 1994, a sort of overview, you see some of them. All of them occurring before the comet hit Jupiter. Since then, a more galactic view has taken place. We have been being pushed and pointed toward the stars. This is a picture of the Pleiades. Here's a picture of apparently the galaxy, the area of Sagittarius, toward the center of the galaxy. 1995, again, asteroid, galaxy, star shots being shown. This is an ancient fertility symbol from West Africa. So the beautiful stars began to appear in 1995. Magnetic current patterns being shown us. Again, more star maps. This one is like a semaphore or labyrinth, all going out. This is one you'll never see anywhere else because it was on French television for exactly one newscast, one of the rare crop circles in France. And the next day, they denied that it had ever been photographed. It turns out that this was in the field adjacent to their top-secret nuclear testing facility, 30 miles from Paris. It's a beauty, though. Oops. Yeah. 1996, we began to move into more modern symbols. Many people talked about this as being a DNA symbol. What I see in this is a rosary. This was outside of a place called Martock near Glastonbury. It just so happened my wife and I, the following week after being in England, went by the Chartres Cathedral. I was amazed to find the rose window of Chartres had been represented in the crop circle 2 weeks before. Coming closer to more modern symbols and iconography. 1996, look at the incredible, the changes in the phenomenon have been going more and more complex. And as I say, look at the Rosicrucian rose here, a solar-lunar type. This is the Vesica Pisces, the ancient Christian symbol with overlapping circles. Also the same as the Hourglass Nebula. Multi-dimensional. Never think you understand. Any article on crop circles takes one point of view, which is understandable. The author has to take a point of view. But crop circles have multi-dimensional levels of meaning. That's one of their things. They are brain teasers. This is an extraordinary formation called a fractal. These are 3 Julia sets in a spiraling 194 circles. My wife and I happen to have the happy advantage of discovering this because she has eagle eyes, and we were driving over the countryside early in the morning, and it was a cloudy day, no one else seemed to be out, and suddenly over the rise of a hill we saw it. So we were in it among the very first, and when you're in them among the very first, you see very beautiful patterning going on in them. Solar lunar, and look at the weave. You don't get very many up-close shots because you have to be there the first day. After people go in them, they start trampling them, which is, kind of inevitable. This one was so beautiful and precise, so it lasted a week because no one dared to walk in that area. In 1997, and last spring, I did a meditation with a group on crop circles, and they came up with this design as a design they would like to see in the crop circle field, with the Jewish star connected to the Islamic crescent in a way of bringing about some Middle Eastern peace. What we didn't know was in 24 hours, the first crop circle in England appeared. There it was. Now what's missing? The star. Yep. However, a few months later, the star came. We are on lunch. Would you mind going another 15 minutes? Okay. Fractal, Star of David. When you go inside, you can see each of the little circles. Each one was a work of art. 23rd of July, look at this. Tell me you do this in the middle of the night without a flashlight, and I will say you should go to the Louvre, go to the Prado, express yourself, make some money. Look at this. Layers. These are circles that are no bigger than 3 feet across. A second fractal Star of David appeared 2 weeks later on the 8th of August, where the outside was inverted to the inside. The Tree of Life, so our Jewish friends are not forgotten. Coming into more modern symbols of today's religions. Now, 1997, I say, was the year of the stars. We had a 3-pointed star, a 4-pointed star, a 5-pointed star, a 6 snowflake-pointed star, and just so we wouldn't forget 6, because often they do emphasize the number 6, a twirling 6-pointed star next to a checkerboard that represents 2 Mayan spiritual cycles. No, 3 Mayan spiritual cycles, I'm sorry. 3 times 260. A 12-pointed star. And one with 13 rims. Very much a Mayan one. Again, coming to the Mayan calendar of 13 and 13 moons in a physical year. A 14 gyroscopic star. That was the highest. We reached 14 levels. This was on the, you can see this in the field. This is actually an ancient ring, an ancient stone ring that's been filled in, and you can still see it from the air, where there are no stones anymore, but the ground is still, after thousands of years, has a patterning to it. Circle. A torus. Incredible shape. 3 dimensions in 2. An ant, the Hopi ant again. One of the few anthropomorphic designs that we've had. They're usually pure geometry, but occasionally one will come like this. And this very unusual one, which could be seen as the Madonna, or, if you turn it upside down, Mickey Mouse. Multi-dimensions, brain teasers. Different strokes for different folks, but actually I think it is Orion, the star system, the belt, pointing us toward, again, perhaps the 2 planets. The last one of the season, this extraordinary triangle, fractalized with 93 circles surrounding it. And finally, I just want to end with Nostradamus. When he made his predictions, were not all doom and gloom. He said that after this passage, which would be likened to a birth passage, we would come into a new humanity and a new world, and that there would be a rise again of the human spirit, of the human culture. I personally believe we are being shown signs of this in the crop circles in part. They are modern miracles. They are pointing us in a direction of purity, in a direction of hope. Other signs of hope around the world have come within the circle, such as these extraordinary photos out of Italy, near where St. Francis lived. The Medjugorje experience, where this person snapped a photograph of thin air where the Virgin was appearing, and the photograph developed into this extraordinary Madonna. Right here in Clearwater, Florida, a bank, of all things, gonna bring her to where she's needed most. Apparently this can still be seen. In Nigeria, a nun kept saying she was having visions of Jesus. And her bishop said, well, if that's true, get a photograph and bring it to me. She got somebody to take a picture of the wall where she was saying that Jesus had said, yes, I'll do it. This appeared. Now, I don't know if Jesus was a historical figure or not, but she sure got a picture, a representation that has meaning. Sometimes the most important aspect of what is happening is the response that it evokes. If it evokes a response of service and of help and of cooperation, then does it matter? in the world today someone who evokes those principles for us. The Dalai Lama has spread an ancient culture's knowledge throughout the world through the most horrible physical circumstances imaginable, the genocide of a people, and yet spiritual good is being brought out of that. Out of India, incredible holy people, again, are bringing a message that we have the power to transform our lives and our planet. I had the opportunity to meet Sai Baba in 1993, fascinating, powerful individual. Amma, the feminine principle. These are not just coming in male form, but in female form. A woman who goes around the world, who is part of the United Nations Council on World Religions, and has run now, I think it's 32 orphanages throughout the country of India, where otherwise children who are orphans are put onto the street and are physically not only abused, but actually their limbs are broken so that they will be better begging material. She's teaching them work trades. An incredible woman in Germany, Mother Mira, whom my wife and I go to see every year. Back at our table, if you are interested, we are taking a small group. We have 2 more places to go and see her in June. The work with the energy, it doesn't just come from any kind of masters. I call them servers. They need to evoke that response in us of service and of cooperation. This is the ancient Australian look at the metaphysical body around the physical body, and I'll talk in the workshop more about the layers and the energy levels and the multidimensional aspect. We have within ourselves the ability and the capability to do this transformation. This is not something that comes from outside, but something that comes from within. I developed a tape that based it on the chakras to work on this. The ancient centers that are known throughout Eastern and actually throughout the Native American medicine. When you take this transformational journeys, pun is definitely intended, I had an aura camera take a picture of me before using my tape, just to show what can be done. This has nothing to do with me. This is a representation. It could be anybody. It could be you. And after using a tape for 20 minutes, of raising of consciousness, of using frequency vibrations and inner affirmations, that's what I want to leave you with. We have 2 ways to look at the world, ladies and gentlemen. We can see the world as an apocalypse waiting to happen. That's one way. It is a vision, it is a view, it is being put out there. Or we can see this planet as our Creator sees it. One of great beauty here, and we part of that beauty. And we have that opportunity right now. Edgar Cayce said, the opportunity is given before you every day. Good or evil, choose you. Thank you very much.